Hey guys, Richard Scout from Remount Horsemanship. I am literally in my barn. I'm working on my barn, and I had a thought come up to me because we've all heard, or most of us, some of us have heard, that you can't pull back with both reins on a snaffle bit, because what you'll do is you'll crack the horse's lower jaw and you'll drive that joint, that single joint, up into the horse's mouth, the top of his mouth. So I'm sitting out here working and thinking about it. I said, well, shoot, I've never made a jig. I've never really thought about it. It's always just been hearsay, usually from bit makers. So I made this little jig, very, very technical. I might even copyright it someday. Just kidding. But I made this jig to simulate a horse's head. That's his pole. I left this intentionally loose down here so that the curb strap is very loose. And I put 2 screws in this piece of wood just so that it can act like the bars of his mouth. So just imagine, if you would, that he does have a mouth, that these are the bars of his mouth, and this is his tongue, or his lower jaw, tongue and lower jaw. So what I'm going to do is, most people are pulling on the horses with both reins because the horse's nose is jutting out. So horse's nose is jutting out, and they're going to pull back on both reins. What happened? Did it pinch him? Nope. The shanks of that snaffle bit, the bars of that snaffle bit are up there against the corners of his mouth. They're not even touching his tongue or his bottom jaw. So let's say the horse is really running off again, his nose is really stuck out. And I'm going to pull back on both reins. Pull back on both reins. Oh, now what's it looking like? Nope, now all the pressure is still on the corners of his mouth. Nothing's on his tongue and nothing's on his bars. Well, let's bring him up a little bit more. Let's get him in a little bit more vertical flexion. We're riding long, and I pull back on both reins. Now let's look at him. Pull back on both reins, and that snaffle bit is still in the bars, it's still in the corners of the horse's mouth. They're not collapsing and breaking his lower jaw, and that single joint is not going up into that horse's top palate. So now let's put this horse on the vertical. So this guy's, he's on the vertical, he's ready to go to town. Old Woody, that's his name, Woody. Old Woody's ready to go to town, he's on the vertical. And now let's pull back with both reins. Okay, so now, look up there. Now we have a little bit more possibly pinching action. But what I'm gonna say to that is, yes, if the horse is on the vertical like that and I'm pulling back on both reins like I'm doing now, I can definitely get some lower jaw cracking, and I can get that joint up into the upper palate of his mouth. But then you're riding way wrong. If your horse is on a vertical like that and you're pulling back on both reins and not holding with both reins, holding by I mean just kind of following that soft feel that he's offering you, then you need to be doing a lot more than just pulling back on both reins. You'd be doing some lateral bending, some untracking the hindquarters, gaining control of your horse. But what I wanted to do is that pretty much any angle that I'm pulling back on both these reins, pretty much any angle, and I'll do it from the front for you guys too, pretty much any angle other than being straight up on the vertical, that post is straight up and down. Pretty much any other angle besides being straight up and down on that vertical, you're not going to get hardly any, if any, lower jaw cracking or driving that joint up into the upper palate of the horse. So now I'm going to show you the front views of the same thing so you can see those. This is the horse with its nose sticking pretty dang far out, and I'm pulling back on both reins. You can see that I'm in the corners of his mouth, not cracking his jaw, and that joint is not going up into his upper palate. This one, the horse is about 8 inches in front of the vertical. I'll be pulling back on both reins. Pull back on both reins. There you can see that I'm still talking to the bars of his, or corners of his mouth. I'm not really cracking his jaw. Curb strap's loose and nothing's going into the top of his mouth. So now let's put it on the vertical and see what happens. So now we're on the vertical. And I am going to pull back with both reins on my snaffle bit. Now is the only time that I have pressure on the bars of his mouth. I'm not really talking to the corners of his mouth or his lips, corners of his lips, but I do have pressure on his bars, and that joint could be going up and popping that top pallet, but only when I'm cranking back with both reins and that horse is already in the vertical position.